Hey, let's just try and bust some myths today. And, hopefully we can give you some tips to help you grow better in the garden. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there on the World Wide Web where they're doing a lot of formulas and magic potions and whatever, and some of them don't work. Some of them don't work. Some of them are not going to do any harm. Probably the vast majority of them are better left just leave them off your plate. I mean, you got a lot of stuff to do in a garden, and you might love it. It might be your passion, and I get it. That half the fun is trying new things and doing different things, but you've got to take your time into account. Your time is valuable. So let's say you're worth even $10 an hour. Say that's what your time's worth. You spend 4 or 5 hours making some concoction out of debris from the garden and this and that, and maybe you get a little bit of fertilizer value. Maybe it does add some organics. But what could you do with those 4 hours it took you to make it? You could have bought, like I say, your time was only worth $10 an hour. You could have bought a lot of fertilizer for 40 bucks. So we want to weigh these things out, and look at them, and it's like, yeah, that's kind of cool. I kind of like it. Maybe if I have spare time, I'll try it. But those 4 hours could have been spent doing something more useful for the most part. And then also, maybe we didn't get that much out of it. A bag of fertilizer, organic or otherwise, and we've saved money by not making our own. I don't want to discourage you from trying some of these things and experimenting, because it can be a lot of fun, and it can really be a learning process. And if I'm looking at a guy with acid soils from back east somewhere, it may work. It may work there, but in my slightly alkaline soils, higher pH, it just may not work. And that brings me to one of my least favorite things that I think that most gardeners should avoid. Or you see them handy little hockey puck looking peat pellets with a net surrounding them. They're really convenient. They actually start seedlings pretty darn well. You just add a little water and it expands, and then it's got that netting around it, holds that soil together, and the seed comes up out of it. The big trouble I find with these is that net doesn't really decompose. And I see they've made changes in the last few years, and I'm sure there's some companies that are doing a better job than others and whatnot with these net pellets. But you got to get that off there. I quit using them a number of years ago because I found this problem. I got a nice little healthy seedlings turning into a pretty nice plant. I put it out in the garden, and it gets stunted at some point. A plant that was grown in regular soil may even have been behind this peat pellet at one point. But I put it in the soil, and eventually this one gets stunted that came with that basket netting of stuff. And it's supposed to be decomposable, but I just don't find them decomposing very well here in my soils. And maybe somewhere with a soil that's better for decomposing, then maybe that's not as much of a problem. But I suspect that it might be. I can go out in my garden, and I'm not surprised when I'm out digging around and doing things that if I find some of these the soil's decomposed, but I find these nets, they're still there 10 years later. I think I've got most of them out of my soil now, but it's not doing any good in there, as a non-decomposed product. And you can try and peel that net off your seedling. you can try and peel it off and get it off, but half the time it's got some roots coming out of it. You're doing some damage to the roots. And I would just say just avoid them. Now there are some good alternatives out there. I've seen some little pellets. You can put them in your planting container. You know, with cocoa coir, some have added fertilizers and things like that to them. You add a little water, they expand. They do a great job. But I end up with a nice healthy seedling without having to deal with that net. Another thing I really hate is this weed barrier material. You can see that this weed barrier, it's still pretty much intact. Doesn't really stop weeds anymore. It's just like a mess. Really, I need to get it out of here to do something. It's tore up in a lot of little pieces and stuff. It's like a nightmare to get it out of here. And this stuff has been in the ground before I owned the place. Somebody had built like a raised bed around here, and they'd put this weed barrier down, and it's still, I mean, it's pretty strong and hasn't decomposed at all. There's another patch of it. You can see there's plenty of weeds growing under it. The soil that's been on top of it is still growing weeds, and it's not doing me a good thing. And so I would say, you know, you're better to avoid these. Better to avoid these weed barriers. And now that doesn't mean that there's not a place for having some sort of weed barrier, but there is a better option. Now the better option for that weed barrier, it can be paper. I mean, paper, it may not add a lot to the soil, but it is going to decompose. It's going to be gone within a year or two, you know. But if you've got like a pathway that you want to try and block some of the weeds, then cardboard can be an option. It's going to break down. You know, I mean, it might be ugly as all hell, so you'd probably want to put some mulch or bark or something over the top of it to help the look. But paper can be a good option, and I'll buy rolls from the home improvement stores of their construction paper, just a brown heavyweight paper, and I can roll it out, and you know, I can put a mulch on top of it. It looks good. It blocks a few weeds, blown in weeds. They'll grow and they'll go through the paper if it's getting adequate moisture. But you know, for a year or two, it's like if I'm trying to explore, do I want a pathway here? You know, from like my chicken coop to a raised bed. Do I want a pathway here? Tired of the weeds, tired of all that mess. Don't want to mow it. You know, I might put down a couple layers of paper, and then put that bark mulch on top of it. And then, you know, I got a year or so that I can explore if this is going to be a good permanent path. If I decide like, hey, I'm loving this is never going to change, I might start pouring some concrete or doing some stepping stones or paving stones or something like that if it's a permanent pathway. But by that same thing, by using this paper method, I can explore if I really like that. I might be like, I'm not getting enough sun for this raised bed. You know, this raised bed's really not working out. Maybe I'd rather plant a tree there. I'm going to do a raised bed over here. You know, no damage done, because all it was paper and mulch. It's just going to improve the soil. Another thing that we want to bust is vinegar for weed killing. I've tried it. I want, you know, a better, more healthy, less toxic way of killing weeds. I've tried different strengths. And here in my slightly higher pH soil, I actually found something out weird. You know, it's like, yeah, I go down a nerd wormhole here saying that, oh man, this could be an interesting experiment. But I've sprayed weeds with vinegar, and they wilt. they start to wilt. They look like they're dying. I'm thinking, oh man, this is working out. I like this vinegar thing. And the next day they're looking decent again. This is where the weird plant geek nerd thing comes in, is I've actually noted that the weeds actually do better. They come back more vigorous than they were before. And I'm like, what? How can this possibly be? And the best explanation I've been able to come up for that is that that vinegar actually slightly reduced my soil pH temporarily, and that made the plant just go, made nutrients more available, or whatever, maybe somehow slightly increased microbes for a minute, but it accelerated the growth of that plant. And it doesn't kill your roots. Maybe you're in a place where, okay, your soil's more acidic, so you're not going to get that pH lowering effect to the extent I did, to where it's a benefit. Maybe that negatively affects the plant in your area, but most likely it's just going to kind of wilt or kill the top growth and leave the root completely intact. So, like I say, vinegar, I like it. I use it on a lot of things. It may have some places here and there, but for weed killing, I find it a myth. The next thing is adding salt to kill weeds. Why? And I've got a higher pH here. Adding salt is going to do nothing to improve my soil. I mean, maybe it kills a plant. It probably does. Matter of fact, I've read some stuff where salt will kill plants. But you got to be a fairly high concentration. And where does that salt go? What happens to that salt once it's killed that weed? Then it has to go somewhere. It's just not like it magically disappears. It's still in your soil. It still goes into your soil, and it's not gonna, if it killed a weed, maybe it kills more things. Maybe, it could definitely kill more things. If nothing else, it may change the pH even higher. In an acid soil, maybe that's not a huge factor. But here, I absolutely do not want to add salt of any kind to my soils. There is no benefit for it. And even if it's out in a driveway, say you've got kind of a driveway or a pathway that's just, gravel or something like that, you want the weeds dead in it, you spray them with it or sprinkle it on them, or whatever way you're doing it. That salt will go into your soil and it's going to leach out. So your pathways here, it leaches out into your garden. It's not doing it a benefit. So don't add salt to your garden. Then probably the number one tip, and you watch any number of my videos, I'm going to keep saying this one. The number one magic thing you can do for your garden is add compost. That benefits and helps everything. We go for a walk in the forest, and often you can just take a handful of soil, and it's like light and fluffy. That's all came from composted materials. Just keep composting, keep putting it down. There's some things, compost teas. I do believe that compost teas and stuff do have some benefits and can help. I feel like they're a little bit more short term. They may be quicker acting initially. So, there can be a place for like a compost tea. But you end up with some double labor here because you want to be putting down compost anyway. And compost is slow to decompose. It's slow to make itself into the soil. But over time, it builds and builds and builds and improves your soil. And so you've got that delayed reaction a bit. So putting down a layer of compost in a garden, you're not going to see a ton of benefit that year, but the next year you will. and if you put down your layer of compost again, then you've got a continuous cycle at this point, and it continues to feed, build, and grow your soil. So I think these garden myths and short tips, we might want to make them a regular thing. You know, some of them I fall for some of them too. Sometimes I have to revisit them. I mean, like the vinegar thing I talked about. It seems like every four or 5 years I have a dumb attack and decide to try it again. So, we're going to explore some of these. Some of these things I also know what they're going to do, but we're going to do it just so you can see it with your own eyes. And, maybe knock a little more sense in my head. I hope you found this useful, and, leave me a comment or something. If you know some crazy things people do in the garden, then I'd like to hear about them. If nothing else, I get a good laugh out of them, and there's not much better than getting a good laugh.